Hey, my name is Noah. I'm 34 years old, and I rent the small back room of an old house on Mulberry Street in Madison, Indiana, in the part of town where the streets run down toward the Ohio River, and half the houses were built before the Civil War, and the other half wish they were. I'm a carpenter, not the kind who frames new subdivisions out by the highway. I do restoration. Old houses. I spend my days inside walls that other men closed up 140 years ago, taking out the rot and the bad repairs somebody made in 1962, putting back the bones the way they were meant to be. It's slow, careful work, and it doesn't pay like new construction, and most people think I'm a little strange for loving it. My truck has a toolbox bolted in the bed with my father's name still stamped on the lid, and a ring of keys to about a dozen houses I'm working on, none of which are mine. I wake up early. I drink my coffee black standing at the counter. I drive to whatever house is open to the studs that week. I work until the light goes. I drive back. Some nights I stop for a plate somewhere. Most nights I don't. The room I rent has good afternoon light coming through the west window, and the honest truth is I'm almost never in it to see it. I'll give you the two things that matter before I get to her, and I'll give them to you straight. I was married 8 years to a woman named Marie. She wasn't wrong about anything she said when she left. She said I'd build a beautiful room for any stranger in this town, and never once thought to build one for us. That I'd spend a whole Saturday hanging crown, molding in somebody else's dining room, and come home too tired to sit at my own table. She wanted me to come off the long jobs, the ones that took me 2 counties away for weeks, and stay close and build a life with my own 2 hands the way I built everything else. And I kept taking the work, because the work was the one thing I was sure I was good at. And a man holds tight to the thing he's sure of. She left 3 years ago. I signed what I needed to sign. I didn't fight it, because I knew, in the place where you can't lie to yourself, that she was right. The other thing is how I came to be on Mulberry Street. And that's where she comes in, so I'll let it run together. I'd been renting a cheap place by the bypass that smelled like other people's cigarettes, and a fellow on a job mentioned a widow over on Mulberry had a room going in one of the old houses. I drove over on a gray afternoon in March. And before I tell you about her, I have to tell you about the house, because I saw the house first, the way I always see the house first. It was an 1880s Italianate, and it was dying. Not all at once. Houses don't die all at once. But I could read it from the curb the way you read a person who's been carrying something heavy alone too long and smiling anyway. The gutters were rusted through. The back of the porch had dropped a good 2 inches off level. There was a tarp on part of the roof held down with a cinder block, and the kind of soft, dark stain creeping up the clapboard at the northeast corner that I know from 20 years of opening walls means there is rot back there worse than anything you can see. It was a beautiful house, and it was 3 or 4 bad winters from being a teardown. And standing on that sidewalk, I did the math a man in my trade does without trying. And the math said, walk away. This is a money pit. It is not your problem. You came for a cheap room, not a project that'll break your heart. Then she opened the door. She came to the door in a flannel shirt about 3 sizes too big for her, sleeves rolled twice, a carpenter's pencil tucked behind one ear, and a smear of plaster dust along her jaw she didn't know was there. Her hair was dark and coming loose from where she'd pinned it up to keep it out of the work. And she pushed a piece of it back with the side of her wrist, the way you do when your hands aren't clean. But it was her face that stopped me. She had the kind of stillness in it that isn't calm. It's held. It's the look of somebody who has learned to keep their face very carefully arranged so it won't do anything they didn't give it permission to do. I'd see that flannel shirt enough times over the next months to understand whose it had been, and to understand that she wore it the way some people keep a chair nobody's allowed to sit in. Her name was June. She owned the place. She showed me the room, the small one off the back, what used to be a summer kitchen, good light through the west window, and the whole time she was apologizing for things. Sorry about the draft. I keep meaning to get to that window. Sorry about the step. Watch the second one. It's loose. Sorry the back stairs are closed off. You'll have to use the front. She apologized for that house like it was a thing she'd done to me personally, and a man who fixes houses for a living wanted to tell her none of it was her fault. That this house had been left to one person to carry, that takes a crew. But I didn't. Because we just met and it wasn't my place. Here's the part I'm not proud of. I stood in that good west light in that little room, and I had every intention of telling her it wasn't going to suit me. I had it ready. The math still said, walk away. I don't have it in me, I told myself, to live inside a problem this size and not be paid to fix it. I'll lie awake every night, listening to that house ask for help. I almost said the room was too small. I had my hand on the truth that would get me out the door. And then, on the way back through, I saw the back staircase she'd said was closed off. It wasn't closed off exactly. There was a sheet of plywood leaned across the bottom of it. And behind the plywood, the stairs climbed up into shadow. And they were beautiful quarter-sawn oak, hand-cut, the work of somebody who knew what they were doing. And they stopped. Dead. At the 7th tread. Above the 7th tread, it was just the stringer and the bare framing, and a row of treads stacked neat against the wall waiting to be installed. With the layout marks still penciled on the riser by a hand that hadn't come back to finish them. I've seen a lot of unfinished work in old houses. I'd never seen anything stop quite like that, not abandoned, but interrupted. The pencil set down mid-thought. I didn't know the story yet. But I knew that staircase was a sentence somebody hadn't been allowed to finish. And something in me that I'd spent 3 years keeping quiet stood up and refused to walk away from it. I took the room. I think I took the room because of the stairs. I've never told her that. I moved in that weekend, and for a while, I was just a tenant who happened to notice things. I fixed the loose second step the first night without mentioning it, because a loose step is a small thing and a man can't help himself. Then it was the west window that whistled, then the porch I shimmed back toward level on a Sunday, then the gutters, which I rehung on a Saturday because the next rain was going to find the inside of her walls, and I couldn't stand it. June would come out onto the porch with 2 cups of coffee and set one on the railing near me without a word, and take hers to the swing. And we'd be quiet together in that way that isn't awkward, the way 2 people are quiet when one of them is working and the other one is keeping a kind of company. She never asked me to do any of it. I never asked if I could. We just fell into it, the way you fall into a rhythm with somebody on a job site. Who reaches for what? Who steps left when the other needs the space? I learned she was not what the word widow had put in my head. I'd had this picture, I'm ashamed to say, of somebody helpless, somebody the house was happening to. But the first time I started in about the original layout of the back rooms, sure of myself the way you get after 20 years, she went to a drawer in the front room and came back with a roll of drawings. Her late husband's, hand-drafted, every beam and joist of that house laid out in pencil. And she put her finger on the spot where I was wrong and she was right. And she knew that house in its bones better than I did, because she'd kept every drawing and every receipt and every photograph since 1974. In folders she could lay her hand on in the dark. Tom used to say the house would tell you the truth if you knew how to read it, she said. I can't swing a hammer worth anything, but I can read it. And she could. After that, I'd find myself checking my own assumptions against her drawings and being right more often because of it. And a kind of respect got into the work between us that I hadn't expected and couldn't have bought. There's a kind of afternoon that started happening that summer that I didn't have a word for at the time, and still don't, really. I'd be on a job all day 2 towns over and drive back tired. And instead of going straight to my room, I'd end up in the side yard with June, doing some small thing that didn't need 2 people. Clearing the old grape arbor that Tom had built and never trained. Pulling the dead boards off the garden fence. Once we spent a whole Saturday evening, after the heat broke, just sorting through a barn's worth of Tom's salvaged hardware. Boxes of old mortise locks and cut nails and brass hinges green with age, sitting on the back step with the boxes between us. Her holding each piece up to the last light to see if it was worth keeping. There was no reason to do it that day. The hinges had waited 3 years. They could have waited 3 more. But we sat out there until the lightning bugs came up over the garden, and she told me which house in town each batch of hardware had come out of, because Tom had known, and she'd kept knowing for him. And I understood that the sorting wasn't about the hinges. It was about saying the houses' names out loud to somebody who'd listen. She surprised me all the time, is the thing. One evening, I was complaining about a stuck sash in the front parlor, the big original window, and I'd have decided I'd have to take the whole thing apart. And she set down her tea and crossed the room and worked a putty knife up under the stop the way I hadn't thought to, and freed the cord and had the weight running true again in about 4 minutes flat. "I can't build anything," she said, sliding the window up and down to show me, easy as anything. "But I watched Tom do this house for 20 years. I'm not helpless, Noah. I'm just outnumbered." I told her I'd never once thought she was helpless. She gave me a look that said she'd heard that before from men who'd thought exactly that. And then she saw that I meant it. And the look changed. It was on that same back step, another night, that she said the thing I've turned over more than anything else she's ever said to me. I'd asked her, careful. Because you learned to be careful with her. Why she didn't just take the easy money, sell to one of the people who kept leaving cards in the door, and go live somewhere that didn't need a man on a ladder every weekend. And she didn't get defensive about it. She thought about it a while, the way she thinks about everything. And then she said, "Because a house isn't where you keep your things, Noah. It's where somebody can find you. Tom always knew where I'd be. The young couple upstairs know where I'll be. Mr. Whitlock knows where I'll be when his daughter forgets to call." She looked at me then, just for a second, and looked back at the dark garden. I'd rather be findable in a house that needs work than lost in one that doesn't. I didn't have anything to say back to that. I just sat with it. I still sit with it. That was Tom, her husband. I'd pieced together the shape of it by then, and one evening on the porch, she told me the rest of it plainly, the way you tell a thing you've finally set down enough times that you can pick it up without it cutting you. Tom had been a builder too. The 2 of them had bought the house wrecked 20 years back, when they were kids, really. And they'd been bringing it back ever since, room by room, weekend by weekend, the long, slow way, on the money they had. It was the marriage and the project at the same time. You couldn't separate the 2. And 3 years ago, this past winter, on a Tuesday, with the back staircase half built and the layout still penciled on the riser, his heart had simply stopped while he was standing on it. She found him sitting on the 7th tread like he'd needed to rest a minute. He was 41. "Everybody kept telling me to finish it," she said. She wasn't crying. She had that held look. "My brother-in-law sent a man over once with a quote to just board it in, make a closet of it." I ran him off the porch. She turned her coffee cup around in her hands. I couldn't let anybody touch it. It felt like if I left it the way he left it, then he'd only just stepped away. like he might come back down and pick the pencil up. I know how that sounds. I didn't tell her it would get easier. I didn't tell her she should finish the stairs and move forward, which is what people say, the people who've never had a thing they couldn't move forward from. I told her the only true thing I had, which came out of my own life sideways. I built a beautiful house for everybody but the person I was married to, I said. And she left, and she wasn't wrong. And I don't think I've let myself be in a room I actually lived in since. So I'm not going to tell you to finish anything. I think I understand keeping a thing the way somebody left it. She looked at me a long moment then, and she reached over and put her hand on the back of mine where it was resting on my knee, just for a second, just long enough that I felt the cool of her fingers and the small rough places on them from work. And then she took it back and said the coffee was getting cold, even though both our cups were empty. And we sat in the dark a while longer, not saying anything. And I knew something had moved that I didn't have a name for and wasn't going to go looking for one. The trouble came in the fall, and it came wearing a good coat. His name was Garrett, Tom's younger brother. He pulled up one Saturday afternoon in a car that didn't belong on Mulberry Street, while I was up a ladder cleaning the very gutters I'd rehung in the spring. And old Mr. Whitlock from the front upstairs room, a retired shop teacher, 76, who'd known Tom and June their whole marriage, was on the porch in his chair where he sat most afternoons. Garrett came up the walk like a man inspecting a property, which I came to understand is exactly what he thought he was doing. He had a loan, it turned out. Years back, when money was tight, Tom had borrowed from Garrett to make a tax payment and keep the house, and there was a paper that gave Garrett a share. And Garrett had been patient about it the way a man is patient about money he intends to collect. And now the riverfront was getting bought up, and the old houses were worth something to the right developer. And Garrett had decided it was time June stopped, as he put it, playing house with a building she couldn't keep up. He said it on the porch in front of Mr. Whitlock, with me close enough to hear. "Be reasonable, June," he said, warm and easy, the way that kind of man performs, being reasonable. "Look at this place. You've got a handyman living in the back doing what he can, God bless him. But this is a sick house, and you know it. And Tom would not want you bleeding yourself dry to keep a corpse propped up. We sell, you take your half, you start over somewhere that doesn't need a man on a ladder every weekend just to keep the rain out. I'm trying to help you. I've always been trying to help you. You're just too stubborn to let me." I came down off the ladder. I didn't hurry. I've got a temper I keep banked low, and I set my tools down on the step one at a time, and I came around to stand on the porch, not in front of June exactly, but in the place where, to keep looking at her, he'd have to look at me too. "The house isn't sick," I said. He looked at me like he was surprised it talked. "I've had 3 walls open in this place since March. The bones are sound. The northeast corner had rot and I cut it out and sistered it. The roof's good now. The foundation's better than my own truck. Whoever told you it's a teardown either doesn't know houses or wants it cheap." I let that sit. And she's not playing at anything. She kept this house standing for 3 years that would have finished off most people. You should ask her how before you tell her she can't. Garrett smiled at me, the kind of smile that's doing arithmetic. "And he'd be the only reason your brother's house is still here," Mr. Whitlock said from his chair, not loud. And that landed harder than anything I'd said, because he was old and he'd been quiet until then. But here's the thing. None of us were what mattered in that moment, and I knew it. And I stepped back, because June had set down the dish towel she'd been holding and stepped up beside me. Not behind me. Beside. "You're right that there's a paper, Garrett," she said. Her voice had gone very quiet and very level. the steadiest I'd ever heard it. The held face finally let loose into something harder than held. Tom borrowed $11,000 from you in 2009, and there's a paper that gives you a share until it's paid. I know because I kept the paper. I kept all the papers. She didn't raise her voice once. And I kept the cashier's check stubs where Tom paid you back, in 2011, $400 at a time, every month for 14 months, because he didn't want to owe his little brother. You cashed everyone. I have the bank's record. The loan's been paid for 15 years, Garrett. And you've been letting me think you were being patient with me out of kindness, when really you were just waiting for the river to make the dirt worth more than the man who's buried thinking about it. For the first time, her voice caught, just barely. You don't get to come onto this porch and tell me what Tom would have wanted. Tom died on those stairs trying to finish this house for me. You don't get any part of it. You never did. And I think you've known that longer than I have. There's a particular silence that happens when everyone on a porch realizes at the same time what a man actually is. Mr. Whitlock had set his jaw. A neighbor across the street had stopped raking. Garrett stood there in his good coat, and you could see him hunting for the version of the conversation that still worked for him. And there wasn't one, because she had the papers, and she'd had them all along, filed where she could lay her hand on them in the dark. This isn't over, he said, which is what they always say when it is. It's been over for 15 years, June said. You just got here today. And he went down the walk to his car that didn't belong on our street. And he drove off, and Mr. Whitlock said, to nobody. And went back to watching the street, which from Mr. Whitlock was a brass band. I want to tell you that's the night it all came clear and we fell into each other's arms. It isn't. Because I am, June will tell you, a slow learner. And what I did after we won was the most foolish thing in this whole story, and I have to own it. What I did was, 2 weeks later, I went on a date with somebody else. Here's the why of it, and the why is the worst part of me. After Garrett, the house felt safe. The work was nearly done, and I let myself, for about one evening, imagine that June might. And then I shut it down hard because that voice that Marie left me with had something to say about it. The voice said, "You are the man who fixes her house. That's all you are to her. You're useful." A woman like June, who loved a man like Tom, is not going to look at the handyman in the back room and see anything but a good roof and clean gutters. You already built a life around being valued for what your hands can do and watched it leave you. Don't do it again under her roof. So when a buddy of mine kept after me about a woman he knew, a perfectly nice woman named Karen who worked at the bank over in town, I finally said yes. Not because I wanted to, but because I thought going might cure me of hoping for the thing right in front of me that I'd decided I couldn't have. I thought a date with a stranger would quiet the voice. I was protecting myself, is what I was doing, and I dressed it up as moving on. Mr. Whitlock caught me in the side yard the afternoon before while I was changing out of work clothes by my truck. He'd been Tom and June's whole marriage from his chair on that porch, and he'd watched me come and go for 7 months. And he didn't miss much for a man of 76. "Heard you've got plans Friday?" he said. He had a way of saying a thing flat and then waiting. I told him a friend had set me up. Nothing serious. He nodded slowly and looked off down Mulberry Street for a while. "Love doesn't always come at you the way the songs say," he said finally. "Sometimes it just shows up with a level and a box of screws and starts keeping the rain off you. And it does that so quiet and so long that you stop noticing it's the most anybody's ever done for you." He pushed himself up out of the chair, which took him a minute. A man who spends a year fixing a woman's house and then drives clear across town to have dinner with a stranger is either a fool or a coward, son. And I've watched you work. You're no fool. And he went inside and let the screen door tap shut behind him. And I stood there by my truck and decided he was a sweet old man who didn't understand my situation, which is the kind of thing you decide right before you do something stupid. June was on the porch when I came down that Friday in a clean shirt with my hair combed. She looked at me, and something crossed her face, and she put it away fast, behind the held look. "You look nice," she said. "Going somewhere?" I told her. "A date," I said. "A friend set it up." She was quiet a second, and then she said, "Good. That's good, Noah. You should." And she said it so evenly, so generously, that I drove off feeling like I'd done the right grown-up thing, the moving forward thing everybody's always telling you to do. Mr. Whitlock watched me go from his chair and didn't say a word, which I should have noticed. Because Mr. Whitlock not saying a word is louder than most men shouting. The date was fine. I want to be fair to Karen, who was kind and easy to talk to, and deserved better than a man who spent the whole dinner aware of how the candle on the table was leaning in its holder and thinking that June would have straightened it without thinking. That's the whole of it. The woman across from me was lovely, and the evening was pleasant and hollow as a drum. And somewhere around the coffee, I understood that I had not come out to move forward. I'd come out to run. And you can't run from a thing that lives in your own chest. I drove Karen home. I shook her hand at her door like a fool, and we both knew. And she had the grace not to say so. And I drove back to Mulberry Street earlier than a date that went well has any right to end. The porch light was on. June was up. She was sitting on the swing in the dark with Tom's flannel on against the cold and a cup of tea gone cold beside her. And I knew she'd been sitting there the whole time I was gone. And I knew that she knew I knew. And there was no arranging her face fast enough this time. I came up the steps. "You're up late," I said, like a coward. "Couldn't sleep." She wasn't looking at me. She was looking out at the dark street. "How was it?" "It was nothing," I said. "It was a nice woman and a nice dinner, and it was nothing. I shouldn't have gone." And that's when she said it. She said it so quietly I almost didn't catch it. And she said it to the street, not to me. Like it was a thing she'd been holding in her mouth for months, and it had finally just come loose without her permission. "Whatever it is you think you're going to find out there," June said, "she'll never love you the way I do." And then her hand went up to her mouth like she could put it back, and her eyes filled. And she said, fast, ashamed, "I'm sorry. Forget that wasn't fair. You're a grown man, you can date whoever you, God, I'm your landlord, I'm sorry, forget I said it." And she started to get up off the swing to go inside. Because she just handed me the truest thing she had, and was already trying to take it back before it could be used against her, the way a person does when the world has taught them that the true thing always gets used against them. I caught her hand. Just held it. And I made myself say the thing I should have said 2 weeks before. And I did it the only way I know how. Which is to start with what's wrong with me before I get anywhere near what's right. Because the wrong was what had been holding the whole thing up like a bad temporary brace. "My wife told me I'd build a room for anybody but her," I said. And she was right. And it broke something in me. And what it broke was the part that believes I'm worth keeping for any reason except what I can fix. So I look at you. And I have looked at you, June. Since the day you opened that door in his flannel shirt with plaster on your face. And the voice in me says, she loved a real man. A man who built this house with her. And you're just the one who keeps the rain off it now. You're useful. Don't you dare hope. So I went on a date to prove to myself I was the kind of man who moves on. When the truth is, I've been in love with you since about the third week, somewhere between the gutters and the porch. And I went out tonight to run away from it because I didn't think a man like me gets to have a thing like this. My throat had closed down to almost nothing. I'm sorry. I'm the slow one here, not you. You said the truest thing on this porch, and I'm the one who's been hiding from it. She was crying now, but it was a different kind, and she was almost laughing through it. You are slow, she said. My God, Noah. I have been bringing you coffee on this porch for 7 months. I rehearsed telling you 100 times, and you just fix something and go to bed. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist, the way she had the first day, and she looked at me with no held in her face at all. Just her, finally, all the way out where I could see her. I didn't fall in love with a man who fixes my house. I fell in love with a man who saw a staircase that stopped at the 7th tread and decided not to walk away from it. That's not useful. That's the whole thing. That's everything. I kissed her on that porch with Tom's flannel between us and the cold coming up off the river. And it wasn't careful, and it wasn't slow. It was 2 people who'd each decided, for their own sad and stubborn reasons, that they didn't get to have this. Finding out at the same time that they were both wrong. And her hands came up to the sides of my face, and they were cool the way her hands were always cool. And then, after a minute, they weren't. And neither was anything else. The next morning, with her permission, with her standing at the bottom holding the drawings, I finished the stairs. I did it the way he'd have done it. Because she had his drawings, and I had 20 years, and between us we knew exactly what he'd meant by every pencil mark. I set the 8th tread, and the 9th, on up past where his hand had stopped, matching his joinery so close that to this day, you can't find the seam where his work ends and mine begins unless you know to look. She sat on the 7th tread the whole time, the one he'd been resting on, with her chin on her knees, watching. And she cried some, and she laughed some, and once she said, he'd have liked you. He'd have hated how slow you are, but he'd have liked you. And I had to stop working for a minute. When it was done, she walked up the whole flight to the top for the first time in 3 years. Slow, her hand on the new rail. And at the top, she turned around and looked down at me and didn't say anything at all. And she didn't have to. A little over a year later, the house on Mulberry Street is the best house on the street. And people slow down to look at it the way I slowed down that gray afternoon in March. Except now they're admiring it instead of pitying it. We painted it back to the colors in Tom's photographs from 1974. Mr. Whitlock's still in the front room and claims the new stair rail squeaks on purpose so he knows when we're coming, which it does not. We rent the upstairs rooms to a young couple and a nursing student, and the house is full now. Full of feet on the stairs Tom started and I finished, which is exactly what he'd built them to carry. I took my name off the long jobs 2 counties away. I work close now. June keeps the books and the drawings. And when I get something wrong about a wall, she's right more often than I am. And I've stopped minding. There's a thing I see every morning that I didn't used to have. And it's so ordinary I can't quite say why it puts a hand on my chest. It's 2 coffee cups on the porch railing instead of 1. And the second one's mine, brought out and set near me by someone, which in 34 years had never once happened until her. She comes out in the flannel, she still wears the flannel, and I would never in my life ask her not to, because a person should get to keep what they keep. And we drink our coffee on the swing and watch the street wake up, and we don't say much. Because we're both people who talk with our hands and we've got nothing left, we're hiding. I spent my whole life building rooms for other people to live their lives in, and I told myself that was the same as having a home. And it isn't. It isn't even close. A home isn't the room you build the most carefully. It's the one room you finally stop trying to fix, because someone you love is standing in it, and the work is done, and you can just be in it with them. June was right about everything on that porch, but she was rightest about the thing that sounded the smallest. That other woman, that nice woman, that whole life out there I'd convinced myself I was supposed to go chase down. None of it would ever have loved me the way she does. Because she didn't love the part of me that fixes things. She loved the part that couldn't walk away from a staircase that stopped at the 7th tread. And it turns out that part of me was never broken at all. It was just load-bearing and waiting all that time for someone to come stand in the room it had been holding up.